Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Gunhead found Deku first. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. All men are not created equal. This was the ultimate, irrefutable truth of the world, a bitter pill forced down the throat of humanity the day the first glowing baby was born in Xingqing City. Society had rapidly restructured itself around this new reality, building a hierarchy entirely dependent on the genetic lottery. If you were born with a quirk, you had a place. If you were born with a strong quirk, you had a future. But if you were born with nothing? If you were part of the 20% of the global population left behind by evolution? Then you were just a spectator in a world of gods and monsters. Izuku Midoriya learned this lesson at the tender age of 4, sitting in a sterile doctor's office, staring blankly at an X-ray of his own foot. 2 joints in his pinky toe, an archaic marker of baseline humanity. A biological red X stamped across his dreams. He remembered the doctor's callous voice, the apologetic look in his eyes that didn't quite reach his soul. You should probably give it up. He remembered the torrential rain of his mother's tears that night, the way she had clung to him, apologizing over and over again as the video of All Might's debut played on the computer screen. She had apologized for something she couldn't control, mourning the death of his dream before it had even begun. But Izuku hadn't given up. He couldn't. The desire to save people with a fearless smile was woven so deeply into the fabric of his being that to tear it out would be to unravel him completely. So, he compensated. He watched, he studied, and he wrote. Currently, his focus was entirely absorbed by the worn, composition notebook resting on his scarred wooden desk at Aldera Junior High. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. The ink was still fresh on a spread dedicated to Empty Lady, a newly debuted hero he had seen on his way to school. He was meticulously detailing the kinetic drawbacks of gigantification, specifically the immense strain it placed on the hero's cardiovascular system, and the massive collateral damage risk in dense urban environments. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your future. The teacher's voice abruptly shattered Izuku's concentration. The man stood at the front of the classroom, holding a thick stack of career aptitude forms. I'll pass out handouts for your future plans now, but... The teacher paused, a sly, knowing smirk crossing his face as he suddenly tossed the entire stack of papers into the air. You're all pretty much planning to go into the hero course, right? The classroom erupted. Hands shot into the air, accompanied by a cacophony of activating quirks. Desks rattled as one student elongated his fingers, another sparked tiny fireworks from her palms, and a boy in the back stretched his neck to the ceiling. It was a chaotic display of genetic privilege, a daily reminder of everything Izuku lacked. Izuku kept his head down, a small, tentative smile on his face. He raised his hand just a fraction of an inch, a silent, almost shameful acknowledgement of his own ambition. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks. The teacher laughed, making no effort to quell the unauthorized quirk usage. But using your powers at school is against the rules, Sensei. Don't lump me in with these losers. The voice cut through the noise like a serrated knife. The classroom fell dead silent. Izuku's shoulders tensed. He didn't need to look up to know who had spoken. Katsuki Bakugo sat leaning back in his chair, his feet kicked up on his desk, an arrogant sneer plastered across his face. As if I had anything in common with these crappy quirks, Bakugo scoffed, his crimson eyes gleaming with a terrifying mix of superiority and latent aggression. They'd be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. I'm the real deal. The class erupted in immediate, indignant outrage. What was that, Katsuki? You think you're better than us? Bring it on, extras! Bakugo roared back, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. The teacher sighed, looking down at his clipboard. Ah, right. Bakugo, you're aiming for UA High, aren't you? A collective gasp swept through the room. UA High School. The pinnacle of hero education. The alma mater of the symbol of peace himself, All Might. It had an acceptance rate of barely 0.2%. It was a fortress of excellence, and Bakugo, with his devastating explosion quirk, was the only one in Aldera who realistically stood a chance. That's exactly why you guys are just extras. Bakugo stood, leaping onto his desk. I aced the mock tests. I'm the only one at this school who could possibly get into UA. I'm going to surpass All Might and become the top hero. My name will be carved into the list of the highest earners. Oh, right, the teacher interrupted, his tone shifting into something distinctly casual, yet laced with a cruel undercurrent. Midoriya wanted to go to UA too, right? Time stopped. Izuku froze, his pen halting mid-stroke. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. For a fraction of a second, the entire class simply stared at the small, green-haired boy sitting quietly in the middle of the room. Then, the laughter started. It wasn't just a chuckle. It was a roaring, booming wave of mockery that physically hit Izuku like a shockwave. Students pointed, clutching their stomachs, tears of mirth in their eyes. Midoriya? No way. You can't get into the hero course just by studying. He doesn't even have a quirk. What's a quirkless nobody going to do? Read a villain to death? Izuku shot up from his chair, his face burning crimson, his hands trembling as he waved them defensively in front of his chest. They got rid of that rule. There's no rule against a quirkless student applying. It's just that there's no precedent. Boom! A concussive blast of heat and sound erupted against Izuku's desk. The force of the explosion threw him backward, sending him crashing onto the hard linoleum floor. His ears rang, a high-pitched whine drowning out the laughter. Through the lingering smoke, Bakugo loomed over him, his palms still smoking, his eyes narrowed into furious slits. Listen up, Deku, Bakugo snarled, using the childhood nickname that meant useless. You're even worse than the rest of these rejects. You're completely quirkless. You think you can rub shoulders with me? You think you can stand in the same ring as me? You'd die in the exams. Izuku scrambled backward, his back hitting the wall. And no, wait, Kaken. It's not like I'm trying to compete with you or anything. Believe me. It's been my dream since I was little. And, well, I won't know unless I try, right? Try what? Bakugo roared, the smoke intensifying from his hands. The entrance exam? What can you do? You're a liability. You're nothing. Izuku had no answer. He could only look away, his heart hammering painfully against his ribs. The teacher did nothing to intervene. The class watched the spectacle with amused indifference. It was just the natural order of things. The strong preyed on the weak. The final bell rang, signaling the end of the day. The classroom emptied quickly, leaving Izuku alone with his thoughts. He sighed, the adrenaline of the confrontation fading into a hollow, bone-deep exhaustion. He reached for his notebook, intending to pack it away. Before his fingers could graze the cover, a hand snatched it up. Izuku gasped. Bakugo stood over his desk, flanked by two of his lackeys. The blond boy held Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13 between his thumb and forefinger, examining the cover with a look of utter disdain. We ain't done here, Deku, Bakugo said, his voice dangerously low. What's that, Katsuki? One of the lackeys asked, peering over his shoulder. Hero Analysis for the Future? Seriously? This guy is delusional. Give it back. Izuku stammered, reaching out a trembling hand. Bakugo didn't even look at him. He simply clamped his hands together around the notebook. Crack! Boom! A flash of orange light, and the sharp smell of burnt paper filled the room. Izuku watched in horror as the cover of his notebook blackened and curled, the pages smoking and singed. Months of meticulous notes, careful observations, and desperate dreams, incinerated in a fraction of a second. Ah! Izuku cried out, his voice cracking. Bakugo held the smoking remains by a single, unburned corner. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it out the open window. Izuku felt his stomach drop as he watched it fall out of sight. The best top-tier heroes have stories about them from their school days, Bakugo said, leaning in close, his voice a venomous whisper. I want the shine of being the only student to make it into UA, from this mediocre city junior high. I'm a perfectionist, see? So, don't even think about applying to UA, nerd. Bakugo turned, shoving his hands into his pockets, and began to walk toward the door. His lackeys followed, snickering. Izuku stood frozen, his fists clenched tight at his sides, tears pricking the corners of his eyes. He wanted to scream. He wanted to fight back. but his body wouldn't move. The paralyzing fear of a lifetime of conditioning held him firmly in place. As Bakugo reached the doorway, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder. A cruel, almost detached look settled over his features. If you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it, Bakugo said, his voice echoing in the empty classroom. Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life. And take a swan dive off the roof. Izuku stopped breathing. The words didn't just hurt, they violated something sacred. They crossed a line that even bullies usually hesitated to approach. Izuku whipped his head around, a flash of pure, unadulterated anger finally breaking through his fear. But Bakugo just held up his hand, letting a series of small, crackling explosions pop across his palm. The implicit threat was clear. Say something. See what happens. The anger fizzled out, replaced by a cold, crushing despair. Izuku lowered his head, his shoulders slumping. Satisfied, Bakugo smirked and walked out, leaving Izuku utterly alone in the quiet classroom. The walk home was a blur of gray concrete and dull noise. Izuku had retrieved his notebook from the koi pond below the school window. The fish had been nibbling at the burnt, soggy edges. He had carefully brushed off the dirt, apologizing to the fish in a quiet, broken voice, and tucked the ruined book into his yellow backpack. His mind was a stormy sea of dark thoughts. Take a swan dive. Did Kaken really mean that? Did he understand the weight of those words? If Izuku actually did it, Bakugo would be instigated for bullying. He could kiss his Yue acceptance goodbye. He was an idiot for saying something so reckless. But maybe he's right, a dark, insidious voice whispered in the back of Izuku's mind. Maybe this is pointless. Maybe you're just dragging out the inevitable. He walked aimlessly, his feet carrying him along a familiar route without conscious thought. He passed by a massive electronic billboard displaying a commercial featuring the pro-hero Kamui Woods. The city was alive with heroes, their smiling faces plastered on every corner, selling energy drinks, insurance, and the illusion of safety. To Izuku, they felt further away than the stars. He approached an underpass, the concrete tunnel casting a long, dark shadow over the pedestrian walkway. He kept his eyes glued to the pavement, lost in the rhythm of his own miserable footsteps. I just need to keep trying, he told himself, forcing his hands to ball into fists. Even if it's impossible. Even if everyone laughs. I have to try. I can't give up. He took a step into the shadows of the underpass. He didn't hear the great shifting. He didn't hear the wet, squelching sound of a massive, gelatinous body squeezing itself through the narrow pipes of the city's sewer system. He only heard a deep, gurgling voice from right behind him, a medium-sized invisibility cloak. Izuku froze, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. He spun around. Towering over him was a nightmare. It wasn't a man, it was a massive, shifting mass of putrid, dark green sludge. Two enormous, bulbous eyes floated erratically within the viscous liquid, accompanied by a wide, jagged maw filled with crooked teeth. The stench hit Izuku like a physical blow, a sickening mixture of rotting garbage, stagnant water, and raw sewage. Panic seized Izuku's chest. He tried to scream, he tried to run, but his legs were lead. The sludge villain lunged. A heavy, wet tendril of slime slammed into Izuku's chest, knocking the breath from his lungs. Before he could recover, the sludge surged forward, enveloping him. Don't worry, the villain gurgled, the sound vibrating through the slime and directly into Izuku's bones. I'm just going to hijack your body. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. After that, it'll all be over. Izuku's mouth opened in a silent scream. Instantly, the foul-tasting sludge forced its way in, rushing down his throat, invading his windpipe, filling his nose. He couldn't breathe. He thrashed wildly, his hands tearing at the thick, rubbery substance covering his face. His nails scraped against the sludge, finding no purchase, passing through the liquid only for it to immediately reseal over him. It was like trying to punch water. You can't grab me, the villain laughed, his jagged teeth practically resting against Izuku's ear. I'm fluid. Thanks for the help, kid. You're my hero. I didn't think that guy had tracked me down to this city, dying. The realization crashed into Izuku's mind, colder than the sludge wrapping around him. I'm dying. Right here. In a dirty tunnel. Nobody knows I'm here. Mom is going to wonder why I didn't come home for dinner." His vision began to darken at the edges. Black spots danced across his eyes. His lungs burned with a fiery agony, his chest heaving uselessly against the impossible pressure. His hands, previously clawing at the sludge, began to weaken. Someone, he thought, a single tear mixing with the vile liquid. "Please, anyone, help me." Suddenly, a massive shadow fell over the entrance of the tunnel. Through his fading, blurred vision, Izuku couldn't make out the figure. It wasn't the towering, muscular silhouette of All Might. It was shorter, wider, and bristling with sharp angles. "Hey, slime ball," a voice called out. It wasn't a booming, heroic voice. It was surprisingly calm, smooth, and laced with professional authority. The sludge villain shifted its massive eyes toward the tunnel entrance. "Who the hell are you?" "Get lost." The figure stepped into the dim light of the underpass. He wore a dark, heavy-duty combat suit reinforced with thick Kevlar plating. His arms were massively disproportionate to his body, ending in terrifying, heavy gauntlets equipped with clusters of gun barrels. His face was entirely hidden behind an armored mask, resembling a cross between a skull and a medieval helm, adorned with sharp spikes. He looked like a villain. He looked like a mercenary walking straight out of a war zone, but Izuku recognized him. Even with his oxygen-starved brain, the encyclopedic knowledge of heroes fired off a flare of recognition. Pro-hero. Gunhead. Hostage situation. Asphyxiation in progress, Gunhead stated calmly, his voice slightly muffled by his helmet. He didn't waste a single second with a catchphrase or a dramatic pose. He analyzed the situation in a fraction of a heartbeat. Fluid physiology. Blunt force and piercing rounds ineffective. Commencing suppression. Gunhead raised his massive right arm, pointing the cluster of barrels directly at the villain. The sludge villain roared, whipping a tendril of slime toward the armored hero. "Die!" Gunhead didn't flinch. He didn't even dodge. He planted his boots, his stance shifting into a flawless, unmovable martial arts guard. Rat-tt-tt-tt-tt-tt-tt-tt. The sound was deafening, echoing off the concrete walls of the underpass. But Gunhead wasn't firing bullets. From his gauntlets erupted a relentless hail of solid, high-velocity keratin projectiles. He didn't aim for the villain's eyes or teeth. He aimed for the mass of sludge surrounding Izuku. The sheer kinetic force and rapid-fire frequency of the projectiles struck the sludge like a tidal wave. While a single bullet would pass right through the fluid villain, hundreds of high-impact strikes per second completely shattered the surface tension of the slime. The sludge violently rippled, bubbled, and finally exploded outward, unable to maintain its cohesion under the suppressive fire. The grip on Izuku's throat loosened just enough. "Now!" Gunhead shouted, lunging forward with terrifying speed for a man of his size. He didn't fire again. Instead, his left gauntlet shifted mechanically with a sharp clack. He thrust his arm forward, firing a specialized support item from his wrist. A small, heavy metallic canister rocketed toward the villain. Mid-air, the canister detonated. It wasn't an explosion of fire, but a violent expansion of a heavy, chemically treated capture net. The netting, lined with weighted tungsten balls, wrapped entirely around the main bulk of the sludge villain. The moment the net touched the slime, the chemical coating reacted, rapidly solidifying the sludge it came into contact with, effectively locking the villain inside a rigid, hardened cage of his own body. "Gah! What the?" The villain shrieked, suddenly unable to liquefy his outer layer. With the villain immobilized, Gunhead grabbed Izuku by the collar of his uniform and ripped him free from the remaining, unhardened sludge. Izuku hit the concrete floor, coughing violently expelling foul-tasting water and slime from his lungs. He gasped for air, his chest heaving as precious oxygen finally flooded his system. He was alive. Through his tearing eyes he watched as Gunhead calmly walked over to the netted villain. The hero retrieved an empty, heavy-duty thermos-like container from a pouch on his belt. With practiced efficiency, he scooped the hardened mass of the villain into the container, screwing the reinforced cap shut. Silence descended on the underpass, broken only by Izuku's ragged breathing. Izuku lay on the ground, trembling uncontrollably. His brush with death was still echoing in his bones. He slowly pushed himself up onto his elbows, looking at the armored juggernaut standing a few feet away. Gunhead turned toward him. The spiked mask looked downright demonic in the shadows. Izuku tensed, a primal instinct warning him to back away from the intimidating figure. Then, Gunhead knelt down on one knee. He reached up, his massive, gun-barrel fingers surprisingly gentle as he tapped the side of his own helmet. With a hiss of depressurization, the terrifying skull mask retracted upward. Beneath the terrifying armor was a remarkably normal, soft-featured face. Gunhead tilted his head, crossed his arms in an X over his chest, and to Izuku's utter bewilderment, held up 2 fingers in a peace sign beside his eye. "Are you okay, little listener? You took quite a tumble," Gunhead said, his voice completely devoid of its previous tactical coldness. It was warm, melodic, and entirely at odds with his terrifying physical appearance. Izuku blinked, his brain completely stalling. I'm so glad I made it in time," Gunhead continued, his shoulders drooping in visible relief. "I'm in town doing a self-defense seminar for the local police precinct, and I heard a commotion in the sewers. I'm sorry you had to go through that." "It must have been super scary," Izuku stared. The dissonance between the spiked, Gatling gun hero who had just ruthlessly tactical takedown a villain, and the man currently speaking to him like a concerned kindergarten teacher, was staggering. I'm okay," Izuku croaked, his throat still burning. He scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly. He looked at Gunhead, awe finally overriding his shock. "Why, you're the battle hero, Gunhead. Your agency specializes in armed combat and martial arts. You debuted 8 years ago, and your arrest record in urban environments is in the top 20 nationwide." Gunhead's eyes widened, a genuine, delighted smile spreading across his face. "Oh my gosh! You know my stats? That makes me so happy. Not many people outside of the hardcore hero nerds know my urban arrest record. You really know your stuff." Izuku flushed red, looking down at his shoes. Well, I want to be a hero, so I take a lot of notes." His eyes darted to his yellow backpack lying on the ground. The zipper had come undone during the struggle, and his burnt, soggy notebook had spilled out onto the concrete. The sight of it brought all the crushing weight of the day crashing back down upon him. "Take a swan dive. You're completely quirkless. You should probably give it up." Gunhead noticed the boy's shift in demeanor. He followed Izuku's gaze to the ruined notebook. The hero reached out and picked it up. He noted the scorch marks on the cover, the water damage, and the meticulous handwriting visible on the exposed pages. "Hero analysis for the future," Gunhead read aloud. He looked at Izuku, his eyes softening. "Did someone do this to your book, kiddo?" Izuku flinched, biting his lip. He wanted to say it was an accident. He wanted to brush it off. But the exhaustion in his soul was too great. Gunhead gently tapped the canister containing the villain. "Well, this guy is securely bottled up. I should probably get him over to the police station." "Are you sure you don't need an ambulance? I can call one right now." "No," Izuku said quickly, shaking his head. "No, I'm fine. Thank you so much for saving me." Gunhead smiled, turning to leave. "All right then. Be careful on your way home. The world is a crazy place right now." He took a step. This is it, Izuku thought. He's leaving. This was a pro-hero. A man who lived the dream. A man who fought villains and saved lives. This was Izuku's only chance to ask someone who actually knew what it took. Someone who wasn't a bitter teacher, a bullied mother, or a cruel classmate. "Wait!" Izuku shouted, the word tearing from his sore throat. Gunhead stopped, turning back with a curious look. Did you forget something?" Izuku's fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He squeezed his eyes shut, his entire body trembling. The words clawed their way up his throat, fighting past years of rejection and mockery. "Even if I don't have a quirk," Izuku yelled, his voice echoing in the underpass. "Can I still become a hero?" Gunhead froze. Izuku kept his eyes squeezed shut, unable to look at the hero's face. He knew what was coming. He braced himself for the pitying look. He braced himself for the gentle letdown, the realistic advice to become a police officer or a firefighter. "I don't have a quirk," Izuku continued, the words spilling out of him like blood from a wound. "I've never had one. And everyone tells me I'm useless. They tell me to give up. They tell me I'm just a Deku. Tears finally breached his eyelids, spilling down his cheeks. But I want to save people, Izuku sobbed, clutching the fabric of his ruined uniform over his chest. I want to be someone who can run into danger with a fearless smile. I want to help people who are terrified, just like you did for me. But, without a power, without a quirk, Izuku opened his eyes, looking up at the armored hero through a blur of tears. Can someone like me really stand in the same ring as the pros? Silence fell over the underpass again. The distant sound of traffic above them felt millions of miles away. Gunhead looked at the crying, battered boy in front of him. He looked at the trembling frame, the complete lack of physical power, the absolute despair written across his young face. Then, Gunhead looked down at the burnt notebook in his hand. Without a word, the hero opened the notebook. He flipped past the waterlogged pages, finding a section that was relatively undamaged. It was the spread on Empty Lady. Gunhead's eyes scanned the page. He saw the sketches, the diagrams of her center of gravity, the calculations on the kinetic force of her footsteps, the notes on how her peripheral vision would be severely limited at a height of 20 meters, and the tactical suggestions on how she should employ sweeping leg kicks rather than punches to maximize ground-level crowd control. Gunhead flipped the page. Kamui Woods. Notes on the flammability of his wood, his reliance on aerial mobility, and a detailed analysis of how his preemptive binding, lacquered chain prison telegraphed itself by a slight shifting of his left shoulder before execution. Gunhead flipped another page. And another. He wasn't just reading fanbit trivia. He was reading the unpolished, raw tactical mind of a savant. These weren't observations about how flashy a quirk was. They were mechanical breakdowns of human physiology, physics, and combat geometry. It was the exact kind of analytical breakdown Gunhead forced his sidekicks to perform, and most of them couldn't do it half this well. Gunhead slowly closed the notebook. He looked back up at Izuku. Izuku shrank back, expecting the worst. Gunhead let out a long, slow breath. He walked back over to Izuku. He didn't offer a pitying smile. He didn't offer a gentle pat on the head. He stood up to his full height, his broad, armored shoulders squared. He looked at Izuku with a gaze so intensely serious that Izuku felt pinned to the spot. Kid, Gunhead said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the cutesy tone and replacing it with the hardened steel of a veteran martial artist. What is a quirk? Izuku blinked, taken aback by the question. A quirk? It's a genetic mutation. A superhuman ability. Wrong, Gunhead interrupted sharply. That's what the media calls it. In the field? In a fight for your life? A quirk is a tool. Nothing more. Nothing less. Gunhead held up his massive, gun-barrel gauntlet. My quirk is Gatling. I can shoot keratin bullets from my fingers. It's a great tool for suppression. But if someone gets past my firing line? If a villain with a speed quirk closes the distance and gets inside my guard? My quirk is utterly useless. Gunhead stepped closer, pointing a heavy finger at Izuku's chest. Do you know why my agency has one of the highest arrest rates in the country? It's not because I have a flashy quirk. It's because I practice Gunhead martial arts. I use throws, grapples, joint locks, and redirection of momentum. If a villain shoots fire at me, I don't need a water quirk to stop him. I just need to step to his blind spot, grab his wrist, and break his center of gravity. Izuku stared, his breath catching in his throat. He had never heard a hero talk like this before. The entire world worshipped quirks as the ultimate decider of fate. But here was a top-tier pro hero, reducing them to mere variables in a combat equation. You asked me if you can be a hero without a quirk, Gunhead said, his voice echoing with absolute conviction. He held out the burned notebook, pressing it firmly against Izuku's chest. I'm looking at a boy who has a mind sharper than 90% of the pros currently patrolling the streets. I'm looking at a boy who, despite having no power, despite being told by everyone that he's useless, still studies, still analyzes, and still wants to save people. You don't have a physical tool built into your genetics. So what? Gunhead smiled, and this time, it was a smile of fierce, burning approval. You build your tools. You use support gear. You learn how to read a villain's body language before they even activate their power. You learn how to throw a punch, how to take a hit, and how to use your environment. Can you be a hero like All Might, punching away tornadoes? No. No one can. Gunhead placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder. But can you be an underground hero? Can you be a tactical combatant who saves lives from the shadows? Can you be a hero who relies entirely on his own two hands and his brilliant brain? Gunhead leaned in, his eyes locking onto Izuku's wide, tear-filled green eyes. Yes. You absolutely can. The world stopped spinning. For 14 years, Izuku had waited for those words. He had begged the universe for just one person to tell him it was possible. He had wanted it from his mother, he had wanted it from his teachers, he had dreamed of hearing it from All Might. He never expected to hear it from a terrifying, spike-covered martial arts hero in a dirty underpass. Izuku's knees buckled. He collapsed forward, his hands gripping the reinforced Kevlar of Gunhead's suit. He buried his face in his hands and wept. It wasn't the quiet, suppressed crying of a bully victim. It was a loud, ugly, soul-cleansing wail. He cried for the years of isolation, for the ruined notebooks, for the burns on his shoulders, and for the sheer, overwhelming relief of finally being seen. Gunhead didn't awkwardly pull away. He didn't tell Izuku to man up. Instead, the massive hero knelt back down on the concrete. He wrapped his enormous, armored arms around the small boy, pulling him into a surprisingly gentle, enveloping hug. He softly patted Izuku's back, letting the boy cry until his lungs were completely empty. There, Gunhead murmured softly, his tone returning to its warm, comforting pitch. It's okay to cry. You've been holding on to a lot of heavy stuff for a long time, haven't you? Let it all out. They stayed like that for several minutes, the pro-hero and the quirkless middle schooler, surrounded by the stench of the sewer, yet completely isolated in a moment of profound validation. Eventually, Izuku's sobs subsided into quiet hiccups. He pulled back, his face red and puffy, hastily wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. I am sorry, Izuku stammered, deeply embarrassed. I got your suit wet. Oh, please, this suit is designed to withstand high-pressure water jets, Gunhead laughed, waving a dismissive hand. A few tears aren't going to breach the Kevlar weave. Gunhead stood up, reaching into a small, weatherproof pouch on his utility belt. He pulled out a sleek, matte black card with silver lettering. Listen to me, kid. What's your name? Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya. Midoriya, Gunhead repeated, testing the name on his tongue. Having a tactical mind and a strong heart is the foundation. But right now, your body is a wet noodle. If you try to fight a villain right now, you'll be snapped in half. You need to forge your body into a weapon. You need to learn how to fight. Gunhead held the card out to Izuku. Izuku took it with trembling fingers. It was a business card. Gunhead Martial Arts Agency. Musudafu Branch Dojo. My agency is based in Atheon, but we maintain a private training dojo right here in the city, Gunhead said, his tone turning strictly professional. I'm going to be in town for the next 10 months overseeing a new tactical training program for the local police. Gunhead looked down at Izuku, a challenging glint in his eye. I don't take on personal students. Ever. It takes too much time, and most people don't have the discipline to survive my regimen. But I hate seeing potential go to waste. And I really hate the idea of a society that tells a kid with your brain that he's useless. Izuku looked from the card to the hero, his heart hammering against his ribs, a new, unfamiliar heat blossoming in his chest. It wasn't anxiety. It was anticipation. I'm offering you a chance, Midoriya, Gunhead said. I won't give you a quirk. I can't. But I can give you the tools to survive without one. I can teach you Gunhead martial arts. I can teach you how to dismantle an opponent twice your size. I can introduce you to the world of support gear. Gunhead crossed his arms, the heavy metal plates of his gauntlets clinking together. But I warn you. It will be hell. You will bleed. You will sweat. You will vomit. You will want to quit every single day. You'll be working harder than any kid with a quirk just to stand on the same starting line as them. Gunhead leaned down, his eyes piercing. Are you prepared to do that? Are you serious about this? Izuku looked down at the matte black card in his hand. He thought of Bakugo's cruel laughter. He thought of his mother's apologetic tears. He thought of the suffocating, terrifying grip of the sludge villain, and the realization that he had been entirely helpless. He didn't want to be helpless ever again. He didn't want a quirk. Not anymore. He didn't need a magic power to fall from the sky and validate his existence. He looked up at Gunhead. The fear that had lived in his eyes for 10 years was gone, replaced by a fierce, emerald fire. He wiped the last remaining tears from his face and planted his feet firmly on the concrete. "I'm serious," Izuku said, his voice steady, carrying a weight he had never possessed before. "I'll do whatever it takes. I won't quit. I promise you I won't quit." Gunhead stared at the boy for a long moment, assessing the resolve in his eyes. Then the hero smiled, a wide, genuine grin that reached his eyes. He struck a dramatic pose, throwing one hand in the air and winking. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. You've got guts, Midoriya." Gunhead turned, picking up the canister containing the villain. He began to walk out of the underpass, the heavy thud of his boots echoing against the walls. "Go home, Midoriya. Eat a massive dinner. Get some sleep." Gunhead called back over his shoulder. Izuku watched him go, clutching the business card to his chest like a lifeline. "Wait. When do we start?" Gunhead paused at the edge of the shadows, bathed in the amber light of the setting sun. He looked back at the small, green-haired boy who was about to undertake the most grueling 10 months of his life. "Tomorrow morning. 5 a.m. sharp at the address on the card," Gunhead said, his voice echoing with the promise of absolute agony. "Prepare to sweat." The alarm clock on Izuku Midoriya's nightstand did not beep, it shrieked. It was 4 a.m. Outside, the city of Muzurifu was still draped in the ink-black silence of the pre-dawn hours. For the first 14 years of his life, Izuku would have groaned, rolled over, and buried his face beneath his all-might-themed comforter. Today, however, his eyes snapped open before the second shriek of the alarm could even register. He didn't feel the usual sluggishness. Instead, a potent cocktail of adrenaline and lingering disbelief flooded his veins. He sat up, his gaze immediately finding the matte black business card resting on his desk, illuminated by the pale glow of the street lamp outside his window. Gunhead Martial Arts Agency. Muzurifu Branch Dojo. It wasn't a dream. The sludge villain, the underpass, the terrifying hero with the heart of gold, the validation that brought him to his knees, it was all real. He, Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless Deku of Aldera Junior High, was going to be trained by a top-tier pro hero. He threw off his covers, the cool morning air biting at his skin, and quickly dressed in his most worn-out gym clothes, a plain white t-shirt, dark green sweatpants, and a pair of red running shoes that had seen better days. He splashed cold water on his face in the bathroom, staring at his reflection. He looked the same. The same messy nest of green hair, the same freckles dusting his cheeks, the same scrawny arms. But behind his eyes, the hollow, desperate look of a boy waiting for a miracle had vanished. In its place was a sharp, focused intensity. He crept quietly into the kitchen to grab a water bottle, hoping not to wake his mother. "Izuku?" He froze. The soft, worried voice came from the hallway. Inko Midoriya stood there, clutching her dressing gown around herself, her brow furrowed in concern. She looked at her son, taking in his gym clothes and the heavy backpack slung over his shoulder. "Mom, I'm sorry, did I wake you?" Izuku whispered. "Where are you going at this hour?" Inko asked, stepping into the kitchen. Her eyes darted over him, the chronic anxiety of a mother with a vulnerable child spiking. "It's pitch black outside." Did something happen yesterday? You came home looking so tired, and your uniform smelled like a sewer." Izuku hesitated. He hadn't told her about the sludge villain. He knew if he did, she would have a panic attack and likely forbid him from walking home alone ever again. But he couldn't lie to her about where he was going. "Mom," Izuku started, his voice steady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the black business card, holding it out to her. "I met a pro hero yesterday." Gunhead. Inko tentatively took the card, her eyes widening as she read the embossed silver letters. "The battle hero?" "Izuku, why do you have this?" "He saved me from a villain," Izuku admitted softly, watching his mother gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. "I'm okay. He saved me before I could get hurt. But we talked afterward." "Mom," he looked at my notebooks. He looked at my analysis. "And he told me," Izuku's voice cracked slightly, the emotion of the previous days still raw. "He told me I could be a hero. even without a quirk. He said he's going to train me to take the UA entrance exam. Inko stared at him. The silence stretched between them, thick with a decade of unspoken apologies and repressed dreams. Inko had spent the last 10 years trying to protect her son from a world that had rejected him at a cellular level. She had tried to steer him toward realistic goals, shielding him from the inevitable heartbreak of chasing an impossible dream. But looking at him now, Inko saw something she hadn't seen since the day they visited that terrible doctor. She saw hope. Pure, unfiltered, unyielding hope. Tears welled in her eyes. Izuku. UA is so dangerous. And without a quirk. I know, Izuku stepped forward, gently taking his mother's hands. Gunhead knows too. He told me it's going to be the hardest thing I've ever done. I'll have to work 10 times harder than anyone else just to survive. But Mom, for the first time in my life, I have a chance. Someone believes in me. Please let me try. Inko looked down at her son's hands, then up at his determined face. She couldn't crush that fire. Not again. She let out a watery sigh, squeezing his hands back. Okay. But you have to promise me you'll be careful. And you have to eat bigger portions. If you're going to be training with a pro hero, you can't survive on Katsudon alone. Izuku smiled, a massive, radiant grin that seemed to light up the dim kitchen. I promise, Mom. I'll be back before school. The Musudafu branch of the Gunhead Martial Arts Agency was situated on the edge of the industrial district. It wasn't a flashy, glass-paneled skyscraper like the Endeavor Agency. It was a renovated warehouse, sturdy, unassuming, and completely devoid of windows on the ground floor. Izuku arrived at 4:55 a.m., his breath pluming in the crisp morning air. He pushed open the heavy steel door, stepping into a massive, cavernous space. The floor was entirely covered in dense, interlocking tatami mats and heavy-duty gymnastics padding. Heavy punching bags suspended from steel rafters lined the walls, alongside rows of wooden training dummies, racks of esoteric weapons, and high-tech weightlifting equipment. The air smelled of chalk, sweat, and worn leather. Right on time. 5 gold stars for punctuality. Izuku jumped. Stepping out from a back office was a mountain of a man. Without his heavy, spiked armor and skull mask, Gunhead was even more intimidating. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his torso a broad, heavily muscled inverted triangle. He wore a tight black tank top and loose martial arts trousers. His arms, free of the massive gun barrel gauntlets, were corded with thick veins and crisscrossed with faded, jagged scars. His face was rugged, featuring a strong jawline and a nose that had clearly been broken more than once. But true to his nature, the terrifying bruiser was smiling brightly, holding a clipboard with a cute, fluffy pink pen. Gee, good morning, Gunhead-sensei. Izuku bowed at a perfect 90-degree angle. Sensei is fine, Midoriya, Gunhead chuckled, walking over. He looked Izuku up and down, his eyes instantly shifting from friendly to analytical. All right. We have exactly 10 months before the UA entrance exam. That is practically no time at all to build a martial artist from scratch. Before we start doing anything cool, I need to see what I'm working with. Gunhead pointed the pink pen at a pull-up bar bolted to the wall. Show me what you've got. Max out on pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, and a suicide sprint across the mats. Izuku nodded, dropping his bag. He approached the pull-up bar, reaching up to grip the cold steel. He took a breath, engaged his lats, and pulled. He managed exactly one. On the second attempt, his arms shook violently, his chin failing to clear the bar. He dropped to the mat, his face flushed with embarrassment. 1.5, Gunhead noted on the clipboard. Push-ups next. Izuku dropped to the floor. He managed 12 before his arms gave out, his chest hitting the mat with a soft thud. Sit-ups yielded 30 before his core screamed in agony. The sprint across the mats left him wheezing, his lungs burning. He stood before Gunhead, head bowed, expecting the pro hero to sigh in disappointment. He was weak. He was a quirkless nerd who spent his life writing in notebooks instead of playing sports. Gunhead tapped his chin with the pen. Excellent. Izuku blinked, looking up in shock. Excellent? But I barely did anything. Midoriya, you have 0 muscle mass, terrible stamina, and your posture screams please don't hit me. Gunhead said cheerfully. You are a complete and total blank canvas, no bad habits to break, no incorrect forms to unlearn. We get to build you from the ground up. Gunhead tossed the clipboard onto a nearby bench. The cheerful demeanor vanished, replaced by the chilling aura of a combat veteran. The UA entrance exam traditionally utilizes robotic enemies to test raw destructive power. It's a system designed to highlight flashy quirks. You cannot punch a robot to death. Therefore, you must be faster, smarter, and more untouchable than anyone else on that field. Gunhead began to pace, his heavy footsteps silent on the mats. Gunhead martial arts is not about overpowering your opponent. It is about the economy of motion. It is about leverage, geometry, and turning your opponent's momentum against them. But before you can throw a punch, you must learn how to survive one. Gunhead stopped in front of Izuku. For the next 3 months, you will not strike a single dummy. You will not learn a single throw. You are going to do 3 things: condition your body, stretch until your ligaments sing, and learn how to fall. Fall? Izuku echoed. Yukimi, Gunhead nodded. The art of falling safely. If you are fighting a villain with super strength and they throw you into a wall, the impact will kill a normal human. You need to learn how to disperse kinetic energy across your body, how to roll, how to protect your head and your spine. If you can't survive the fall, you can't get back up to fight. Gunhead pointed a scarred finger at a high dive platform positioned over a thick pile of crash mats in the corner of the room. Climb up. Jump off. I'll tell you what you did wrong when you land. We do this until your body instinctively knows how to hit the ground without breaking. Go. Thus began the first crucible. Months 1 to 3, breaking the foundation. The first 3 months of Izuku's life under Gunhead's tutelage were a blur of absolute, unadulterated agony. His daily routine became a grueling marathon. Wake up at 4 a.m. Train at the dojo until 7:30 a.m. Go to school, desperately trying to stay awake during lectures. Return to the dojo at 4 p.m. Train until 8 p.m. Go home, do homework, sleep. Repeat. Gunhead was a relentless taskmaster. The hero designed a calisthenics routine that pushed Izuku's frail body to the absolute breaking point. Hundreds of squats, lunges, planks, and burpees. Izuku threw up on the 3rd day. Gunhead patted him on the back, offered him a mint, and told him to get back on the bar. But the hardest part was the yukimi. Gunhead threw Izuku. He swept his legs, judo-tossed him, and pushed him off platforms. For weeks, Izuku went to school covered in an ever-shifting tapestry of bruises. His muscles ached with a deep, persistent fire. Walking up the stairs at Aldera Junior High felt like climbing Mount Everest. His peers noticed the change. Hey, look at Deku, one of Bakugo's lackeys sneered during lunch in the 2nd month. He looks like a zombie. Did he trip down a flight of stairs? Bakugo sat with his feet on his desk, scowling as he watched Izuku shuffle past the classroom door. The nerd looked like he had been put through a meat grinder, but there was something wrong. Usually, when Izuku walked the halls, his head was down, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting around like a terrified prey animal anticipating an attack. Now, despite moving like an arthritic old man, Izuku's posture was remarkably straight. His eyes weren't darting, they were tracking. Bakugo didn't like it. Later that week, as Izuku was walking out of the school gates, Bakugo intercepted him. Without a word of warning, the blonde delinquent swung his arm, aiming a low-powered explosion directly at Izuku's shoulder to knock him down. It was a bullying tactic he had used 100 times. But this time, the outcome was different. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't cower. As Bakugo's arm swung forward, Izuku's eyes locked onto the shifting of Bakugo's hips and the tightening of his shoulder muscles. Telegraphing, Izuku's brain registered instantly. Without conscious thought, Izuku's body reacted. He didn't try to block the blast. Instead, he stepped precisely half a pace to his left, dropping his center of gravity just an inch. Bakugo's hand sailed past Izuku's shoulder, the small explosion detonating harmlessly in the empty air. The momentum of the missed strike pulled Bakugo slightly off balance, his foot slipping a fraction of an inch on the pavement. Bakugo caught himself, whipping his head around in shock. Izuku stood 2 feet away, looking just as surprised as Bakugo. He looked down at his own feet, realizing what he had just done. He hadn't just dodged. He had applied the footwork Gunhead had drilled into him for hours on end. The concept of stepping into the blind spot of an attack's trajectory rather than away from it. What the hell was that, Deku? Bakugo snarled, sparks popping in his palms. Izuku's heart spiked, but he forced his hands to remain unclenched by his sides. Nothing, Kaken. I just slipped. Izuku turned and walked away before Bakugo could press the issue, his mind racing. It worked. The grueling, agonizing repetition was actually rewiring his nervous system. His notebooks changed, too. Where Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13, which he had meticulously repaired with tape, was filled with observations on quirks, Volume 14 became a study of human anatomy. He drew diagrams of the human skeletal structure. He studied kinesiology. He mapped out the major pressure points, the rotational limits of the rotator cuff, and the exact angle of leverage required to unbalance a bipedal opponent. Gunhead encouraged this obsession. During their evening sessions, while Izuku iced his bruised limbs, Gunhead would sit with him, reviewing footage of pro-hero fights. Look at Endeavor here, Gunhead pointed to the screen with a beefy finger. Massive firepower. But look at his stance. He plants his feet wide before he unleashes a prominent spurn. He anchors himself. If you encounter a villain with a similar range quirk, you don't look at their hands, Midoriya. You look at their feet. The moment they plant, you move off their center line. Understand? Yes, Sensei. Izuku nodded rapidly, scribbling furiously in his notebook. If I wait for the fire to manifest, I'm already dead. I have to read the biomechanical prep work. I have to move before the quirk activates. Gunhead grinned, ruffling Izuku's sweaty hair. Exactly. You can't outrun a bullet, kid. But you can outsmart the finger pulling the trigger. By the end of the third month, Izuku's body had transformed. The scrawny, trembling boy was gone. In his place was a lean, highly conditioned teenager. He didn't have massive, bulging biceps, but his core was forged steel, his legs were coiled springs, and his stamina was boundless. He could do 50 pull-ups without breaking a sweat. He could fall from a 2-story platform, execute a perfect shoulder roll, and be back on his feet in a fraction of a second. He was ready for the next step. Months 4 to 6, the art of redirection and close-quarters combat. Don't block a freight train, Gunhead said, pacing around the center mat of the dojo. Derail it. It was the first day of month 4. Izuku stood in the center of the mat, his hands wrapped in training tape, breathing steadily. He wore a fitted black compression shirt and loose martial arts pants. He felt lighter, faster, more in tune with his own kinetic energy than ever before. If a villain with a strength enhancement quirk throws a haymaker at you, and you try to block it with your forearm, your bones will shatter into powder, Gunhead explained, his voice echoing in the large room. Your strength is finite. Theirs might be effectively infinite. So you do not meet force with force. You meet force with a void, and you fill that void with leverage. Gunhead gestured to one of his sidekicks, a tall, muscular man whose quirk allowed him to harden his skin like stone. Rook! Charged Midoriya. Full speed. Rook nodded, his skin taking on a gray, rocky texture. He lowered his shoulder and charged at Izuku like an enraged rhinoceros. Izuku's eyes widened. His instinct screamed at him to run away. But Gunhead's training overrode the fear. Watch the hips. Watch the center of gravity. Rook was heavy, his momentum carrying him forward in a straight, unstoppable line. As Rook closed the distance, extending his arms to tackle, Izuku didn't retreat. He stepped diagonally, an angular shift that took him precisely out of Rook's direct path. As Rook surged past him, unable to halt his massive forward momentum, Izuku reached out. He didn't try to strike the stone skin. Instead, his hands clamped onto Rook's leading wrist and the fabric of his uniform near his tricep. Izuku pivoted on his lead foot, dropping his hips low, pulling down and back in the same direction Rook was already moving. He didn't lift Rook. He simply added his own weight and rotational force to the sidekick's existing kinetic energy, essentially acting as a steering wheel for a speeding car without brakes. Rook's feet left the ground. He sailed through the air, flipped completely upside down by the redirection of his own force, and slammed into the tatami mat with a thunderous crash. Izuku stood over the groaning sidekick, still holding Rook's wrist in a hyperextended joint lock, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with adrenaline. The dojo was silent. Gunhead broke the silence with a series of loud, enthusiastic claps. Beautiful! Flawless execution of the Tai Otoshi drop. You read his commitment, stepped off the line, and used his own mass against him. That's Gunhead martial arts. Izuku let go of Rook, bowing deeply to the sidekick. I'm sorry, Rook-san. Did I pull too hard? Ugh, no, kid, you're good, Rook groaned, rubbing his neck as he sat up. Damn. For a guy with no quirk, you feel like a steel trap. From that day on, the training shifted entirely into close-quarters combat, CQC. Gunhead taught Izuku how to dismantle the human body. He learned wrist locks that could force a man twice his size to his knees in agony. He learned chokes that could render an opponent unconscious in 6 seconds. He learned how to target the soft tissues, the throat, the solar plexus, the floating ribs, the back of the knees, areas that could not be easily strengthened by muscle alone. More importantly, Izuku learned how to integrate his analytical mind into his physical movements. Gunhead would set up sparring scenarios where Izuku was blindfolded, forced to rely on the sound of footsteps and the shifting of air currents to dodge. Then, Gunhead brought in other pro heroes from his network, heroes with minor quirks, speed quirks, and emitter quirks. Izuku lost constantly. He was battered, bruised, and frequently thrown across the room. But every loss was a data point. He learned that people with ranged quirks panicked when someone got within 2 feet of them. He learned that fighters with strength quirks often severely overcommit to their punches, leaving their balance completely exposed. Izuku's analytical mind, once dedicated to writing admiring notes about heroes from a distance, became a tactical supercomputer. He would watch an opponent for 30 seconds, catalog their favored foot, their dominant hand, and the tells of their quirk activation, and then execute a strategy to neutralize them. By the end of the 6th month, Izuku wasn't just surviving the sparring sessions. He was winning them. Months 7 to 8, the equalizer. Martial arts are essential, Gunhead said one evening, wiping sweat from his brow as he and Izuku sat on the mats, drinking water. But we have to be realistic, Midoriya. You are going to be facing villains with mutations. Villains made of acid, covered in spikes, or capable of generating massive area of effect attacks. Your bare hands can only do so much. Izuku nodded, wiping his face with a towel. He had thought about this constantly. I've been looking into support gear. Eraserhead uses a capture weapon because his quirk doesn't enhance his physical strength. Snipe relies entirely on firearms. If I want to be an underground hero, I need tools to bridge the gap. Gunhead grinned, a predatory smile showing off his teeth. I was hoping you'd say that. Wait here. Gunhead walked into his back office and emerged a few minutes later carrying a heavy metal case. He set it down on the mat and unlatched it. As an officially registered pro-hero agency, we have licenses to procure high-grade support items for our sidekicks and trainees, Gunhead explained, flipping the lid open. I pulled some strings with a contact at a support company to get these tailored for you. Izuku leaned forward, his eyes shining with pure nerdish delight. Inside the case were 3 distinct pieces of equipment. The first was a pair of sleek, matte black forearm bracers. They looked like oversized fingerless gloves that extended past the elbow. Weighted combat bracers, Gunhead explained, tapping the metal. They are lined with a non-Newtonian fluid polymer and reinforced carbon fiber plating. They are heavy, about 5 pounds each. They will slow your punches down initially, but they are designed to absorb massive amounts of kinetic energy. If a villain swings a baseball bat at you, or uses a minor blunt force quirk, you can block it with your forearms without shattering your radius and ulna. Izuku reverently lifted one of the bracers, feeling the dense weight. He slipped it over his forearm, tightening the straps. It felt like armor. Second, Gunhead pointed to a pair of cylindrical metal batons, about 2 feet long each, resting in foam cutouts. Eskrima sticks. Titanium core, rubberized grip. They collapsed down to 6 inches for easy storage on a utility belt. Gunhead picked one up, his thumb grazing a small button near the hilt. A sharp crack echoed in the room as blue electricity sparked across the tip of the baton. Stun batons. The voltage is adjustable. Non-lethal, but capable of locking up the nervous system of an adult male for several minutes. If you can't get close enough to grapple, or if the villain's body is dangerous to touch, you use these to extend your reach and neutralize the threat. Like a sword, but focused entirely on striking pressure points and nerve clusters, Izuku muttered, his mind already calculating the rotational velocity needed to maximize a strike to the radial nerve. Exactly, Gunhead nodded. Then, he pointed to the final item in the case. It looked like a spool of thick, metallic gray tape, nestled next to a high-tension throwing harness. This is the crown jewel, Gunhead said softly. It is incredibly difficult to master. Eraserhead uses a variation of this, but his is manipulated via a special cloth that responds to his quirk. You don't have that luxury. You will have to rely on pure physics. Gunhead picked up the spool. Carbon steel alloy wire woven into a high-tensile carbon fiber tape. It is virtually unbreakable. It is designed to bind, trip, and disarm. You will throw it, use the weighted ends to wrap around targets, and use it to control the battlefield from a distance. Izuku picked up the heavy spool of tape. It felt cold, rigid, and deadly. The UE exam relies on robots, Gunhead said, stepping back. You can't choke out a robot, Midoriya. You can't joint lock a hydraulic press. You are going to have to use these tools to blind them, trip them, and rip out their wiring. For the next 2 months, these tools are glued to your body. You do not eat, sleep, or train without them. The introduction of the support gear was like starting from zero all over again. The bracers threw off his balance. The added weight on his arms made his strikes slower and his guard heavy. Izuku spent weeks adjusting his center of gravity, learning to use the extra 5 pounds on his forearms to add crushing momentum to his elbow strikes and back fists. The batons were easier to adapt to. Gunhead brought in an expert in Filipino Kali stick fighting. Izuku learned the fluid, figure-8 motions, learning to strike, block, and parry with blinding speed. He practiced targeting the joints of the wooden training dummies until the wood was splintered and indented. But the capture tape was a nightmare. Without a quirk to guide it, throwing the tape was like trying to lasso a moving car with a garden hose. Izuku spent hours every night standing in the center of the dojo, throwing the weighted tape at moving pendulums. He missed. He tangled himself up. The steel-woven fabric gave him brutal rope burns across his palms and fingers, turning his hands into a mess of blisters and calluses. It's about the flick of the wrist, Midoriya. Gunhead shouted over the sound of Izuku groaning in frustration as the tape wrapped around his own leg. You're throwing it like a baseball. It's a whip. Snap your wrist, let the momentum carry the weight, and pull back the exact moment it makes contact to force the wrap. Izuku gritted his teeth, unwrapped his leg, and reset his stance. His hands were bleeding through his bandages, but he didn't care. He pictured Bakugo's sneer. He pictured the sludge villain. He pictured the 0% chance the world had given him. He snapped his wrist. The tape lashed out like a striking viper, the weighted end whistling through the air. It struck the swinging pendulum, wrapping around the narrow pole 3 times in a fraction of a second. Izuku yanked back, locking the bind tight. Got it. Izuku breathed, sweat dripping from his nose. Gunhead smiled from the sidelines. Good. Do it 10,000 more times. Months 9 to 10, the Crucible. The final stretch before the UA entrance exam was a period of intense, hyper-focused synthesis. Izuku's body was a machine, finely tuned and honed to a razor's edge. The support gear felt like natural extensions of his own limbs. It was the final evening of training. Tomorrow was the exam. The dojo was empty, save for Izuku and Gunhead. The lighting was dimmed, casting long shadows across the tatami mats. 10 months, Midoriya, Gunhead said, standing in the center of the mat. He wasn't wearing his casual workout gear. He was fully suited up in his hero armor, the massive spike skull mask pulled down over his face, his Gatling gauntlets locked and loaded. You've survived everything I threw at you. But surviving a training session isn't the same as surviving a real fight. To graduate from my tutelage, you must pass one final test. Izuku stood opposite the pro hero. He wore his tactical bracers, his stun batons holstered at his lower back, and the spool of capture tape secured to a specialized gauntlet on his left wrist. He took a deep breath, dropping into the low, balanced stance of Gunhead martial arts. The rules are simple. Gunhead's voice boomed mechanically through his mask. I will not use lethal force, but I will not hold back my speed or my technique. I will be firing rubberized kinetic rounds. You have 5 minutes. If you can incapacitate me, disarm me, or simply survive until the timer rings, you pass. Gunhead raised his massive gauntlets. Begin. Rat-t-t-t-t-t-t-t-t. A hail of rubber bullets erupted from Gunhead's arms. Izuku didn't flinch. He exploded into motion. He dove to the side, executing a flawless shoulder roll across the mat, the kinetic rounds chewing up the tatami where he had stood a millisecond prior. He leads with suppressive fire to limit my movement. Izuku's mind raced, analyzing the geometry of the room. He wants to corner me against the wall so he can use his superior mass to crush me. Izuku popped up from the roll, sprinting in a zigzag pattern. He reached to his belt, pulling a small, golf ball-sized sphere, a smoke pellet Mei Hatsum had promised him, though he had bought a generic version for this test. He slammed it into the ground. A thick cloud of white smoke erupted, instantly obscuring Izuku's position. Gunhead ceased firing, stepping into the smoke, his senses heightened. Visual obscurement. Smart. But I can hear your footsteps, kid. Gunhead swung a massive armored backhand toward a sound on his left. The blow connected, but not with flesh. It shattered a wooden training dummy Izuku had kicked over to serve as a decoy. Swish. From the rafters above, a length of capture tape dropped down like a hangman's noose. Izuku had used the smoke cover to scale the wall padding and vault into the steel beams. The tape lashed around Gunhead's right gauntlet, wrapping tightly around the gun barrels. Gotcha! Izuku shouted, dropping from the rafters. He used his entire body weight, combined with gravity, to yank the tape violently. The immense rotational force pulled Gunhead's heavy arm upward and off-center, exposing the hero's flank. Izuku landed silently, his right hand drawing a stun baton in a blur of motion. He didn't aim for the heavy Kevlar armor on Gunhead's chest or back. He aimed for the small, unprotected gap behind the knee joint. Crack! The electrified baton struck the sciatic nerve cluster with pinpoint precision. The high voltage surged into Gunhead's leg. The massive hero grunted, his leg buckling involuntarily under the neuromuscular shock. As Gunhead dropped to one knee, Izuku didn't stop. He vaulted off Gunhead's bent knee, flipping over the hero's back. In midair, he whipped the capture tape around Gunhead's throat and under his left arm, crossing the lines to create a brutal, makeshift straitjacket bind. Izuku landed, planted his feet, and threw his weight backward, pulling the bind taut. Gunhead was trapped on one knee, his right arm locked upward by the initial tape strike, his left arm and neck pinned by the secondary bind, his right leg paralyzed by the stun baton. Izuku held the tension, his muscles straining against the immense strength of the pro-hero, his breath ragged. Time, Gunhead choked out, tapping the mat twice with his free fingers. Izuku immediately released the tension, the tape slackening. He stumbled backward, collapsing onto his backside, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. Gunhead slowly stood up, brushing off the tape. He pressed the release on his helmet, the skull mask sliding up to reveal his face. He was beaming. 1 minute and 42 seconds, Gunhead announced, looking at his internal chronometer. He looked down at Izuku, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and awe. You bypassed my armor, neutralized my mobility, and executed a perfect suppression bind against an opponent with a massive weight and quirk advantage. Gunhead walked over and extended a massive hand. Izuku looked at the hand. He looked down at his own. His knuckles were bruised, his palms heavily calloused and scarred from the capture tape. He wasn't the weak, trembling boy who had cried in the underpass. He was a weapon, forged in the fires of discipline and tactical obsession. Izuku reached up and gripped Gunhead's hand, allowing the hero to haul him to his feet. Midoriya, Gunhead said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. You are ready. Later that night, Izuku stood in the bathroom of his apartment. The house was quiet. His mother had cooked an absolute feast of katsudon to celebrate his final day of training, and was now asleep. Izuku turned to look at himself in the full-length mirror. He was transformed. He didn't possess the towering, impossible musculature of All Might. He would never punch a hole in the clouds or level a city block with sheer force. But as he looked at his reflection, he realized he didn't want to. He was lean, his muscles dense and defined like tightly woven steel cables. His shoulders were broad, his posture straight and grounded. He traced the rough, abrasive skin of his palms, the physical manifestation of his refusal to quit. His eyes, once wide and perpetually fearful, were sharp, calculating, and calm. He possessed the quiet, lethal presence of a coiled spring. He had spent his whole life waiting to be given a tool to survive in this superhuman world. Gunhead had taught him that he didn't need one given to him. He could build himself into the tool. Tomorrow was the UA entrance exam. He would be stepping onto a battlefield filled with teenagers who could breathe fire, shatter concrete, and move at the speed of sound. He was just a boy with some heavy tape, metal sticks, and a notebook full of observations. Izuku cracked his knuckles, a small, confident smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. Let them underestimate me, he thought. He turned off the light, leaving the quirkless Deku in the dark, and walked toward his future. The morning of the UA entrance exam, Muzdalifu was blanketed in a thin, cold mist. It clung to the asphalt and wrapped around the streetlights, giving the city an ethereal, expectant atmosphere. Izuku Midoriya stood before the full-length mirror in his bedroom, his breathing slow and measured. Today was the day the world would evaluate his worth. Today, he would step into the arena with the genetically gifted, the prodigies, and the powerhouses, armed with nothing but his own two hands, his mind, and the tools he had bled to master. He dressed with meticulous care, treating the act like a sacred ritual. First came the compression undersuit, a tight, moisture-wicking black fabric that clung to his newfound musculature. Over that, he pulled on a dark green, heavy-duty tactical jacket, customized by a local tailor using funds Gunhead had provided. The jacket was reinforced with a lightweight Kevlar weave around the ribs and shoulders, not enough to stop a bullet, but enough to absorb the grazing blow of a blunt object or a sharp piece of shrapnel. Next came the weighted bracers. He strapped the matte black, polymer-plated guards tightly over his forearms. The familiar, comforting weight of the 5-pound guards grounded him. They were his shields, his counterweights, the heavy anvils upon which he would break his opponent's momentum. He clipped a specialized tactical belt around his waist. On the small of his back sat the twin holsters for his titanium core-stun batons, their rubberized grips resting perfectly at the natural resting height of his hands. On his left hip was a specialized spool-feed mechanism, clicking securely into place. He threaded the end of the high-tensile capture tape through a guide on his left bracer, locking the weighted, magnetic tip into the palm deploy mechanism. Finally, he laced up a pair of heavily modified combat boots, customized with high-grip rubber soles and reinforced steel toes. Izuku looked at his reflection. He didn't look like a traditional hero. He lacked a flashy cape, bright spandex, or a striking crest on his chest. He looked like a tactical operative, a shadow soldier, a ghost stepping out of the fog. You build your tools. Gunhead's voice echoed in the back of his mind. You learn how to read a villain's body language before they even activate their power. You learn how to throw a punch, how to take a hit, and how to use your environment. Izuku gripped his left wrist, feeling the cold steel of the capture tape spool. He took a deep breath, his green eyes hardening into chips of emerald ice. I'm ready. The gates of UA High School were colossal, towering monuments of glass and steel that dwarfed the hundreds of hopeful teenagers streaming through them. Izuku walked up the main promenade, his footfalls silent despite his heavy boots. He kept his hands in his jacket pockets, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. He wasn't looking at them with the starry-eyed, terrified awe of the boy he had been 10 months ago. He was assessing them. The boy with the engines on his calves, Izuku noted, his eyes tracking a tall, stern-looking student with glasses. Heavy reliance on forward momentum. Linear fighter. Weak against lateral trips and uneven terrain. The girl with the pink skin and horns. Acidic secretions? Her shoes looked specially padded. Close combatant, but vulnerable to range suppression. Out of my way, Deku! The voice was a harsh rasp, cutting through Izuku's internal monologue like a rusty blade. Izuku stopped, shifting his weight slightly. Katsuki Bakugo stomped past him, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched aggressively. Bakugo stopped a few paces ahead, turning to glare at Izuku with his trademark, explosive scowl. I don't know what kind of delusional trip you've been on these last few months, Bakugo sneered, his red eyes darting over Izuku's tactical gear, pausing on the heavy bracers visible beneath the rolled-up sleeves of his jacket. Playing dress-up with some heavy pads isn't going to save you. You're quirkless. You're going to die in there today. Don't stand in front of me. 10 months ago, Izuku would have flinched. He would have stuttered, waved his hands defensively, and apologized for existing. Today, Izuku just looked at him. He didn't look at Bakugo's eyes. He looked at Bakugo's shoulders, noting the slight tension in the right deltoid, the microscopic shift in the blonde's hips. Bakugo was perpetually coiled, always ready to launch an explosion from his right hand. He was incredibly powerful, but he was also predictable. Izuku let out a slow, silent breath, dropping his chin slightly. I'm not standing in front of you, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice completely devoid of its old tremor. It was calm, even, and infuriatingly steady. I'm just walking to the exam. Good luck. Izuku stepped to the side, maintaining a perfect, balanced stride, and walked past his childhood tormentor without a second glance. Bakugo froze. A muscle jumped in his jaw. The sheer, unnatural calm radiating from Izuku made Bakugo's skin crawl. He spun around, a tiny pop of an explosion sparking in his palm, fully intending to scream at the nerd. But Izuku was already walking up the steps, his posture straight, his awareness clearly extending in a 360-degree radius. For a split second, Bakugo didn't see the weak, crying Deku. He saw a stranger. As Izuku ascended the grand staircase toward the auditorium, a sudden, erratic gust of wind caught a stray piece of plastic, blowing it directly under his foot. His heavy boots slipped on the polished marble step. Gravity instantly claimed him, pulling him forward toward the hard stone edge. Before panic could even register, 10 months of brutal Yukimi conditioning took over. Izuku didn't flail. He didn't close his eyes. He instantly tucked his chin to his chest, rounded his shoulders, and allowed the forward momentum to carry him into a flawless, diagonal shoulder roll. He hit the marble, dispersed the kinetic energy across his padded shoulder and back, and popped back onto his feet in a single, fluid motion, his hands naturally coming up into a relaxed guard position. Whoa! A cheerful voice gasped from behind him. That was so cool. You totally saved yourself. Izuku dropped his guard, turning to see a girl with a short auburn bob, permanent pink blushes on her cheeks, and a bright, bubbly smile. Oh, thank you, Izuku replied, slightly taken aback by her sunny disposition. He automatically scanned her. Light on her feet. Pads on her fingertips. A tactile emitter quirk? I was going to catch you with my quirk, but you move like a gymnast. She laughed, pressing her fingertips together. I'm Ochiko Uraraka. I'm super nervous, but we're going to do our best, right? Izuku offered a polite, genuine smile. Izuku Midoriya. And yes, Uraraka-san. We'll do our best. She beamed at him and jogged ahead into the auditorium. Izuku watched her go, a small feeling of warmth blooming in his chest. A normal conversation, he thought. Gunhead-sensei was right. Confidence changes how the world sees you. The written exam was a breeze. Izuku's mind, a sponge for technical data, hero laws, and physics, devoured the test. But the true trial began an hour later in the massive, darkened orientation auditorium. Welcome to today's live performance. The voice hero. Present Mike stood at the DJ booth on stage, his voice amplified to deafening levels, his blonde hair spiking up like a cockatoo. Everybody say hey. Silence echoed through the massive room. Present Mike didn't miss a beat. Tough crowd. All right, listeners. Let me walk you through the practical exam. You'll be experiencing a 10-minute mock cityscape battle. You can bring whatever you want. After this presentation, you'll head to your specified battle centers. Izuku looked down at his printout. Battle Center B. He glanced to his left. Bakugo was staring at his own card. Battle Center A. They were separating students from the same middle schools to prevent cooperation. A logical administrative move. On the massive screen behind Present Mike, an 8-bit graphic of a cityscape appeared, populated by 3 different types of robotic silhouettes. There are 3 types of faux villains in every battle center, Present Mike announced. They are worth 1 point, 2 points, and 3 points respectively, based on their difficulty. Your goal is to use your quirks to incapacitate these faux villains and rack up a high score. But remember, no attacking other examinees. That's a red card, baby. Robots, Izuku muttered softly, pulling a small notebook and pen from his jacket pocket. His brain was already running thousands of simulations. Standard mechanized infantry. They'll likely be constructed of reinforced steel and titanium plating. Blunt force from human knuckles will be highly ineffective unless enhanced by an emitter or mutant quirk. Therefore, they must have exposed joints to allow mobility. Hydraulics, wiring, optical sensors. Excuse me. I have a question. A tall boy with glasses, the same one Izuku had noticed earlier, stood up perfectly straight, a spotlight suddenly illuminating him. He pointed rigidly at his own pamphlet. On the printout, there are clearly 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, UA, the top hero academy in Japan, should be ashamed. We are here because we wish to be molded into exemplary heroes. The boy then whipped around, pointing a stiff, accusatory finger directly at Izuku. In addition, you over there with the curly hair. You've been muttering this entire time. It's distracting. If you're here on a pleasure trip, then you should leave immediately. The auditorium fell dead silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to Izuku, sitting quietly in his seat. Bakugo smirked in the darkness, waiting for the nerd to burst into tears and apologize. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't shrink into his chair. He calmly finished writing a sentence in his notebook, clicked his pen shut, and looked directly at the bespectacled boy. Izuku stood up. He didn't slouch. He stood at perfect attention, his hands resting naturally at his sides, his green eyes locking onto the taller boy with intense, unyielding focus. I apologize if my muttering disturbed you, Izuku said, his voice projecting clearly across the silent auditorium. It wasn't defensive, it was the measured, professional tone of a tactician giving a briefing. However, vocalizing threat assessments is a standard cognitive focusing technique. Based on the silhouettes, I was analyzing the potential mobility joints and optical blind spots of the faux villains to compensate for the structural disadvantages of human combatants against mechanized armor. I assure you, I am taking this exam with the utmost seriousness. I will endeavor to keep my volume down. Izuku gave a crisp, formal bow, then sat back down, opened his notebook, and clicked his pen, ready to resume taking notes. The bespectacled boy stared at him, his mouth slightly open, completely derailed by the logical, professional, and utterly unapologetic response. I see. Thank you for your diligence. The boy bowed stiffly and turned back to the stage. Up in the announcer booth, a tired-looking man wrapped in a yellow sleeping bag cracked open one eye, staring down at the green-haired boy on the monitors. Well, all right then. President Mike recovered quickly, clapping his hands. Examinee number 7111, nice catch. The 4th faux villain is worth 0 points. It's a massive obstacle. Every center has one. It will rampage in tight spaces, so my advice? Run away from it. It's not worth your time. An environmental hazard, Izuku noted mentally. A psychological test to gauge how examinees react to overwhelming odds without the promise of a reward. Interesting. That's all from me. President Mike shouted, striking a pose. I'll leave you with our school motto. Go beyond. Plus ultra. Battle Center B was a breathtaking simulation of a modern metropolis. Towering skyscrapers, winding alleys, intersections, and concrete barricades stretched out beneath the overcast sky. Izuku stood at the front of the massive crowd gathered before the giant steel doors of the city. He ignored the murmurs, the nervous energy, and the showboating of the other examinees. He was in the zone. He closed his eyes, visualizing the intricate, brutal choreography of Gunhead martial arts. Breathe. Shift weight. Find the center. Right, let's start. President Mick's voice boomed from the observation towers above. The crowd of examinees stood frozen, waiting for a countdown. 3, 2, 1. Was what they expected, but Izuku didn't wait. Gunhead had beaten the concept of waiting for a starting gun out of him in month 2. In a real villain attack, there was no countdown. There was only action and reaction. Before President Mike could even finish his next sentence, Izuku exploded into motion. He didn't run with a clumsy, flailing sprint. He moved with terrifying efficiency, his body leaning forward, his heavy boots propelling him off the asphalt like a fired missile. He slipped through the massive, opening doors before they were even a quarter of the way open, leaving a gust of wind in his wake. "What are you waiting for?" Present Mike screamed from the towers, realizing the rest of the students were just staring at Izuku's retreating back. "There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run!" The crowd surged forward in a panic, but Izuku was already a ghost, disappearing into the labyrinth of the concrete city. He sprinted down the main avenue, his eyes darting across rooftops, alleyways, and shadows. His ears, trained to pick up the microscopic shifting of human muscles, easily detected the heavy, rhythmic grinding of metal gears turning the corner of the next block. Izuku slid to a halt, pressing his back against the brick wall of a corner building. He peered around the edge. A one-pointer. It was essentially a one-wheeled unicycle of death, balancing on a massive, studded tire, topped with a heavily armored chassis and a single, glowing red optic sensor. Its two mechanical arms ended in blunt, crushing pincers. Target acquired. Izuku stepped out from cover just as the one-pointer turned its optic toward him. Target locked, the machine's digitized voice droned. It revved its engine, charging at Izuku with surprising speed, its heavy tire tearing up the asphalt. Izuku didn't back away. He charged straight at it. As the machine closed the distance, swinging a massive metallic pincer toward his head, Izuku executed a slide. He dropped his weight, his Kevlar-reinforced knees hitting the pavement, and slid directly under the swinging arm. As he passed under the chassis, Izuku reached up with his left hand. The weighted bracer provided the necessary inertia. He grabbed a thick bundle of exposed hydraulic hosing connecting the machine's undercarriage to its main drive shaft. With a brutal, twisting yank, Izuku ripped the hoses entirely out of their sockets. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the street in a dark arc. The one-pointer shrieked, its internal systems failing catastrophically as it lost all pressurized control of its wheel. The massive robot pitched forward, slamming face first into the concrete with a deafening crash, skidding to a halt. Izuku popped up from his slide, not even looking back. 1 point. He sprinted into a side alley. The sound of explosions, crashing metal, and shouting examinees began to fill the city, but Izuku tuned it out. He was a predator in a metal jungle. Two two-pointers emerged from a cross street, looking like massive mechanical scorpions with dual optic sensors. They spotted him immediately. "Annihilate!" They chirped in unison. Izuku didn't break stride. He reached back, his hands wrapping around the rubberized grips of his stun batons. He drew them in a fluid, cross-body motion, pressing the ignition switches. With a sharp crack, thick arcs of blue electricity danced across the titanium tips. The first two-pointer lunged, snapping its heavy claws. Izuku didn't try to block the heavy steel. He utilized Gunhead's Tai Otoshi principles. He sidestepped the lunge, allowing the robot's immense forward momentum to carry it past him. As the exposed joint of its mechanical knee came into range, Izuku drove the right stun baton directly into the gap between the armor plating. 50,000 volts of electricity surged directly into the robot's unshielded internal wiring. The two-pointer seized violently, its optics flashing blindingly bright before shattering entirely. The robot locked up and crashed into the wall of a building, completely fried. The second two-pointer calculated the threat and adjusted, rearing back to fire a net from its tail. Izuku didn't give it the chance. He holstered his right baton, fluidly bringing his left arm up. He flicked his wrist with the snap of a whip. Thwip. The high-tensile capture tape shot out of the spool on his wrist. The weighted end lashed around the second two-pointer's optical stalk, rapping 3 times. Izuku planted his feet, anchored his weight, and yanked downward with all his might. The robot's head was violently jerked down, blinding it and throwing its center of gravity completely off. Before the machine could correct itself, Izuku used the taut tape as a zipline. He sprinted forward, vaulted off a parked car, and drove his heavy, steel-toed boot directly into the robot's primary cooling fan on its chest. The metal crumpled inward. The fan shattered, the internal turbine jamming catastrophically. The robot smoked, sparked, and died. 5 points. Up in the observation room, the faculty of UA High School sat before a massive wall of monitors, watching the chaos unfold. We have quite a crop this year, a petite woman in a space suit, the Pro Hero 13, commented. Look at the explosion boy in Center A. Raw destructive power. The girl in Center C with the vines is quite efficient, too, noted the Blood Hero, Vlad King. Sitting in the corner, shrouded in shadows, eraser head, Shota Aizawa, ignored the flashy quirks. His dark, tired eyes were locked onto monitor 4B. He watched a green-haired boy in a tactical jacket seamlessly dodge a three-pointer's missile barrage. The boy didn't panic. He used parkour to scale a fire escape, vaulted off a rusted balcony, and dropped directly onto the robot's back. In a blur of motion, the boy drove an electrified baton into the main processor housing, frying the machine, before executing a perfect dive roll off the collapsing chassis. No wasted movement, Aizawa thought, leaning forward slightly. His center of gravity is flawless. He's not using a strength quirk, he's relying entirely on joint-locking machinery and electrical bypasses. His gear, that capture tape. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. That's Gunhead martial arts. Hey, Shota, check out this kid in B. Midnight, the R-rated hero, pointed to the same monitor. He hasn't used the quirk once. Is he holding back? He's not holding back, Aizawa murmured, his voice cutting through the chatter. He doesn't have one. The room fell silent. Even the principal, a chimera creature known as Nizu, turned his intelligent, beady eyes toward Aizawa. A quirkless examinee? Snipe, the Kauba-themed hero, asked in disbelief. Are you sure? He just dismantled a three-pointer in less than 4 seconds. Look at his forearms. Aizawa pointed a bandaged finger at the screen. Weighted bracers to absorb shock. Stun batons for localized system overloading. High tensile tape to manipulate the environment. He's a baseline human utilizing pure kinetic physics and support gear. And he's currently outperforming half the emitter quirks on that field. All Might, sitting in his deflated, skeletal form near the back of the room, stared at the monitor. His blue eyes widened as he watched the boy move. He remembered a green-haired kid 10 months ago, asking if a quirkless person could be a hero. He remembered a police report about a boy saved by Gunhead, young Midoriya. All Might thought, a profound sense of awe washing over him. You didn't need my power. You forged your own. Let's see how they handle the true test, Principal Nizu said cheerfully, his paw hovering over a large red button on his console. The test of true heroism. Nizu pressed the button. Down in Battle Center B, Izuku had just fried his 18th robot, bringing his score to a respectable 42 points. He was breathing heavily, sweat pouring down his face, his muscles burning from the relentless exertion. But he felt alive. He felt capable. Suddenly, the ground beneath his boots violently trembled. The surrounding buildings groaned, glass shattering in the windows as a localized earthquake shook the artificial city. Dust billowed into the sky, blocking out the artificial sun. From the center of the main avenue, a shadow rose. It wasn't a robot. It was a metal mountain. The zero-pointer towered over the buildings, easily standing 20 stories tall. Its massive treads crushed cars flat, and its gargantuan arms swung, obliterating the top floors of a nearby skyscraper in a shower of concrete and steel. Its single, glowing red eye swept the street, a terrifying beacon of inescapable destruction. What the hell is that? An examinee screamed. Run! It's the zero-pointer! Another shouted, abandoning a half-destroyed two-pointer and fleeing in the opposite direction. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. Gunhead had prepared him for thugs, for mutated villains, for speedsters and brutes. But nothing could prepare a human mind for the sheer, overwhelming scale of a walking skyscraper. Run, his instincts screamed. Run away from it. It's not worth your time. President Mike had literally told them to run. Izuku took a step backward, intending to join the retreating crowd. I'll help. The voice was faint, barely audible over the grinding gears of the behemoth. But Izuku heard it. He stopped, his head snapping toward the sound. About 50 yards away, directly in the path of the advancing zero-pointer, was the girl from the entrance. Uraraka. She was pinned to the ground, a massive slab of concrete from the destroyed building resting heavily on her right leg. She was struggling, using her quirk to try and lift it, but she was exhausted, clutching her head in pain. The zero-pointer raised its massive foot, preparing to crush the entire intersection. The other examinees ran right past her. The bespectacled boy from the auditorium hesitated for a fraction of a second, his engines whirring, but the sheer terror of the machine drove him backward. Izuku didn't think. He didn't formulate a plan. He didn't calculate the physics. The training evaporated. The fear vanished. There was only the girl, the machine, and the space between them. Izuku sprinted. He ran toward the metal mountain, his boots pounding against the cracked asphalt. As he ran, his tactical mind violently rebooted, analyzing the impossible situation at lightning speed. I can't punch it. I can't break it. I can't lift that concrete slab in time. His eyes darted around the environment. To his right, the wrecked chassis of a three-pointer he had destroyed earlier lay in the street, its massive, heavily armored body intact, weighing several tons. To his left, the support pillar of an overpass, reinforced with thick steel rebar. Don't meet force with force, Gunhead's voice echoed. Meet it with a void. Create leverage. Izuku reached his left arm back, pressing the release valve on his spool. He flicked his wrist with everything he had, sending the weighted capture tape flying toward the destroyed three-pointer. The tape wrapped tightly around the chassis main axle. Izuku didn't stop running. He kept sprinting toward Uraraka, the tape spooling out behind him. He reached the center of the street, planting his feet, and threw the tape again, this time utilizing a complex figure-8 whip motion. The tape sailed over the street, wrapping tightly around the massive steel-reinforced pillar of the overpass. He yanked the line, locking the magnetic clasp. He had just created a high-tensile tripwire across the street, anchoring a 10-ton dead robot to an immovable concrete pillar. Midoriya? Uraraka gasped, looking up as Izuku slid to his knees beside her. Hold on! Izuku shouted. The zero-pointer stepped forward, its massive, building-sized tread rolling directly over the trap. The heavy tread caught the capture tape. The machine's immense forward momentum violently pulled the line taut. On the other end, the 10-ton chassis of the dead three-pointer was violently yanked across the street, dragged directly into the path of the zero-pointer's moving tread. Crunch! The heavy, unyielding metal of the three-pointer wedged perfectly between the massive gears of the zero-pointer's tread system. The physics were undeniable. A massive gear turning against a wedge of solid steel creates immense, catastrophic friction. The zero-pointer shrieked, a deafening screech of grinding metal. The left tread seized completely, locking up. The machine, moving forward with thousands of tons of momentum, suddenly lost its left side mobility. The entire behemoth pitched violently to the side, its chassis groaning, gears snapping like gunshots. It didn't fall, but it stopped dead in its tracks, leaning precariously, its internal alarms blaring. Now, Izuku ignored the screaming machine above them. He drew a stun baton, leaving it turned off. He jammed the titanium rod under the edge of the concrete slab trapping Uraraka's leg. He wedged a smaller rock underneath the baton to act as a fulcrum. When I lift, pull your leg out. Izuku roared over the noise. He grabbed the end of the baton and threw his entire body weight onto it. The leverage multiplied his physical strength. The heavy slab groaned, lifting an inch. Then two. Go! Izuku screamed, his muscles screaming under the strain. Uraraka scrambled backward, freeing her bruised leg from the trap. The moment she was clear, the rock fulcrum shattered under the pressure. The slab crashed back down. Above them, the zero-pointer's massive servos whined, preparing to tear its own treads apart just to take a step. Izuku didn't wait. He scooped Uraraka up, throwing her over his right shoulder in a fireman's carry. Her weight was nothing compared to the weighted vest Gunhead had made him wear during stair sprints. He ran. He cleared the danger zone just as the zero-pointer finally snapped its own axle, the massive machine collapsing forward, crushing the exact spot they had been in seconds before in a tidal wave of dust and debris. Izuku kept running until he reached a safe block, finally dropping to his knees and gently lowering Uraraka to the ground. Are you okay? Izuku wheezed, his lungs burning, his capture tape spool smoking from the friction. Uraraka stared at him, her eyes wide with absolute awe. She looked at the massive cloud of dust rising over the buildings, then back at the boy who had just stopped a walking skyscraper with a piece of tape and a dead robot. You! She breathed. You saved me. Before Izuku could respond, A siren echoed across the city. Time's up. Present Mick's voice rang out. Izuku collapsed onto his back, staring up at the gray sky. His body ached. His hands were shaking. But he was smiling. He had done it. He had fought in the arena, and he hadn't backed down. A week passed in agonizing silence. Izuku returned to his normal routine, but the weight was eating him alive. He had scored 42 villain points. Historically, the cutoff for the hero course was around 50. He had missed the mark. He had spent 10 months breaking his body. He had stopped the zero-pointer, but he hadn't destroyed enough targets. He sat at his desk, staring blankly at his newest notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14. Izuku! Inko burst into his room, completely ignoring the fact that she had practically torn the door off its hinges. She was holding a plain white envelope, her hands shaking so violently it looked like she was holding a live grenade. It's here! The letter from Yue! She cried. Izuku felt his stomach drop. He slowly stood up, walking over and taking the heavy envelope from her trembling hands. It bore the red wax seal of Yue High School. Mom, can I open it alone? He asked quietly. Inko nodded, tears already welling in her eyes, and backed out of the room, closing the door behind her. Izuku sat back down at his desk. He stared at the envelope. This was it. The verdict on whether a quirkless kid with some gear could truly stand among the heroes. He carefully tore open the seal. Instead of a piece of paper, a small, metallic disc slid out onto his desk. Before Izuku could examine it, the disc whirred to life. A holographic projection shot upward, illuminating the dark room. I am here as a projection, Izuku gasped, pushing his chair back. The holographic figure of All Might, wearing a bright yellow suit, stood before him on the desk. Young Midoriya! All Might boomed, pointing a massive finger at him. It has been 10 months since we crossed paths in that alleyway. I saw the police reports. I know what happened with the sludge villain, and I know who took you under his wing. All Might's face softened, losing some of its bombastic, public persona, shifting into an expression of deep, profound respect. I told you once that you needed a quirk to be a hero. I told you to be realistic. I was a fool, my boy. You proved me entirely wrong. All Might pressed a button on a remote in his hand. A scoreboard appeared next to him. You scored 42 villain points in the practical exam, All Might said. An impressive feat for anyone, let alone someone utilizing pure martial arts and support gear. However, it was not quite enough to pass the traditional threshold. Izuku lowered his head, his heart shattering. He had failed. But wait! All Might shouted, his voice echoing in the room. The exam is not just about destroying villains. How could a Hero Academy reject a student who risks his life to save others? The projection shifted, showing a video of the exam. It was Izuku, sprinting toward the zero-pointer. It showed him perfectly executing the capture tape trap, halting the massive machine, lifting the rubble, and carrying Uraraka to safety. Rescue points, All Might declared. A panel of judges awards points for heroic acts. Young Midoriya, you put your life on the line against an insurmountable threat, using your brilliant mind to protect a fellow examinee. The scoreboard updated. Izuku Midoriya, villain points, 42. Rescue points, 60. Total, 102 points. Rank, first place. Izuku stopped breathing. He stared at the glowing numbers. First place. He had beaten everyone. He had beaten Bakugo. You passed, young Midoriya, All Might said softly, extending a hand toward the camera. Welcome. This is your Hero Academia. The hologram fizzled out, leaving Izuku sitting in the dark, the metallic disc humming softly on his desk. He didn't cry. The time for tears was over. Instead, he placed his calloused hands flat on his desk, bowing his head in silent, overwhelming gratitude. Bzzz. His phone vibrated on his bed. Izuku stood up and picked it up. He had a picture message from an unknown number. He opened the text. It was a picture of Gunhead. The massive hero was out of his armor, wearing a frilly pink apron over his massive muscles, giving a double thumbs up to the camera. On the counter in front of him was a massive cake, expertly frosted and shaped like a terrifying, spiked Gatling gun. Written on the cake in bright pink icing were the words, "I knew you could do it." First place. So proud of you. Izuku burst out laughing, the sound ringing clear and bright in the quiet apartment. He wiped a single stray tear from his eye, looking out his window toward the distant silhouette of UA High School. The metal graveyard had tested him, and he had survived. Now the real work would begin.